In the late 19th century, the Arabian Peninsula was a land divided, where shifting sands mirrored the constant shifts of power. Tribes fought one another for survival, for honour, for control of wells and trade routes. There was no central authority, no single leader who could unify the people. Riyadh, the historic heart of Najd, had fallen under the influence of the Al-Rashid dynasty. It was during this time of loss and displacement that the Al Saud family fled into exile. Among them was a boy named Abdulaziz bin Abdulrahman Al Saud. He was young, but the wounds of exile carved deep marks in his memory. Kuwait became their refuge, but in Abdulaziz's heart burned a yearning for his homeland, for the narrow streets of Riyadh, for the palm groves of Wadi Hanifa, for the legacy of his ancestors. Each evening, in the gatherings of men, Abdulaziz listened intently as elders told stories of bravery and sacrifice. He memorized tales of how his forefathers once ruled and defended these lands, and as he listened, a flame of determination grew. He dreamed, not as a child daydreams, but as a future leader envisions destiny. His thoughts whispered to him, "One day I will return, one day I will restore what has been lost." Years passed. Exile tested the young prince, but it also forged his character. While others might have surrendered to despair, Abdulaziz grew stronger. He learned endurance from the desert, patience from hunger, and strategy from watching the politics of the region. By 1902, he was only 20 years old, yet his resolve had already matured beyond his age. With a heart full of faith and a vision that reached beyond the horizon, he made a bold decision to reclaim Riyadh, not with a great army, not with foreign aid, but with 40 loyal men who shared his dream. Imagine that moment, 40 men against a garrison, 40 men against the odds of history itself. Some of them whispered, "How can so few take back a city?" Abdulaziz, calm but firm, replied, firmly, "Victory is not in numbers but in faith. God is with us." Through the silence of the desert, they rode by night and hid by day. The cold pierced their bones, the sand burned their feet, but their will did not break. Each mile brought them closer to Riyadh, and closer to the destiny that awaited them. At dawn, they reached the walls of the city. Abdulaziz and his companions slipped quietly through narrow alleys until they stood before the Mazmak fortress, the symbol of power in Riyadh. Inside, the deputy of Ibn Rashid ruled, confident that his enemies were far away in exile. Abdulaziz divided his men, some were to guard the gates, others to block reinforcements, while he and a small group would storm the fortress itself. His heart pounded, not with fear, but with the weight of history. The doors burst open, swords clashed, voices roared, and steel rang against stone. In the chaos, Abdulaziz's spear struck true, the deputy of Ibn Rashid fell, and with his fall, the fate of Riyadh changed forever. Shouts of triumph filled the air. Allahu Akbar! Riyadh was free once more. What began with exile ended with return, and what began with 40 men became the foundation for a nation. News of Riyadh's fall spread like desert fire carried by the wind. To some it was a miracle. To others, a warning that the young Abdulaziz was no ordinary exile. He had proven that courage, faith and vision could overcome numbers. Yet for Abdulaziz, this was only the beginning. The fortress might have fallen, but the land remained divided. Rival tribes still held grudges, and powerful enemies in Hale and beyond would not remain silent. He knew that the path ahead would be longer, harsher, and bloodier. Still, in those early days, the people of Riyadh looked to him with fresh hope. They saw not only a warrior, but a leader who could bring justice where chaos had reigned. He treated rich and poor alike, settled disputes with fairness and won hearts with humility. Slowly, the city began to believe that unity was possible. Over the next years, Abdulaziz fought tirelessly to consolidate his hold on Najd. Every battle was not just a clash of swords, but a test of endurance. He faced betrayal, shifting alliances, and the endless challenge of balancing tribal pride with the dream of a greater state. He rode across endless deserts, slept under the stars and ate the same food as his men. His presence inspired loyalty. Warriors followed him not because of wealth, but because they believed in his destiny. Still, the enemies were many. The Rashidis in Hale prepared armies determined to strike back. Abdulaziz countered with intelligence and surprise, using the desert itself as his ally. His men learned to vanish like shadows in the dunes, only to reappear where the enemy least expected them. In one campaign after another, he pushed forward, consolidating tribes under his banner. But Abdulaziz understood something deeper. Swords alone could not bind the land. He worked tirelessly to secure religious legitimacy, drawing scholars to his side, reinforcing the principle that his cause was not personal ambition, but the establishment of justice under God. Slowly, city after city acknowledged his authority. Agreements were struck, marriages were arranged, and alliances sealed. Each victory, whether on the battlefield or at the negotiation table, was a step toward unity. For the first time in generations, people began to imagine an Arabia not fractured by endless rivalry, but united under a single rule. A dream once thought impossible was now beginning to take shape. One of Abdulaziz's greatest challenges came in the east, in the region of Al-Ahsa. It was a wealthy area with fertile lands and access to the Gulf, long under Ottoman influence. To secure it meant securing resources, trade, and a doorway to the wider world. In a bold move, Abdulaziz led his men in a campaign that brought Al-Ahsa under his control. The victory not only expanded his territory, but also sent a message to regional powers. A new force was rising in Arabia, and it could not be ignored. With Al-Ahsa, his vision expanded. He no longer dreamed only of Najd. Now, the idea of unifying the entire peninsula was within reach. The sands of Arabia, once scattered, were beginning to form into a single land. But greater challenges lay ahead in the west. The Hijaz, home to Mecca and Medina, the holiest cities of Islam, was a prize that carried not only political power but spiritual authority. Whoever held the Hijaz would be guardian of the two holy mosques, a responsibility revered by Muslims across the world. For years, the Sharifs of Mecca ruled the region, often aligning with foreign powers. Abdulaziz knew that to unite Arabia fully, he must bring the Hijaz under his rule. But he also knew that such a conquest could not be one of bloodshed, for the sanctity of the holy places demanded restraint. In the 1920s, through a combination of diplomacy, pressure, and carefully planned campaigns, Mecca opened its gates. Abdulaziz entered humbly, bowing his head in gratitude, kissing the ground of the Haram. He declared that the service of the two holy mosques would be the crown of his rule. The entry into Mecca marked a turning point. For Abdulaziz, this was not just another city, it was the beating heart of Islam. By securing the Hijaz, he bound his leadership not only to the people of Arabia, but to the wider Muslim world. In Medina, he walked the streets with humility, conscious of the history that surrounded him. Here was the city of the Prophet, the resting place of Muhammad, peace be upon him. Abdulaziz knew that every decision he made would echo far beyond his lifetime. Pilgrims began to arrive under his protection, travelling in safety where once they had feared bandits and chaos. For the first time in generations, the roads to Mecca and Medina were secure. This was more than politics, it was the fulfillment of a trust. Yet even as unity grew, the world around Arabia was changing rapidly. The Ottoman Empire had collapsed, and Britain and France carved up much of the Middle East. The great powers looked at Arabia with interest, for it was not only the cradle of Islam, but also a land of potential resources. Abdulaziz was no stranger to foreign envoys. He met them with dignity, listened carefully, but always guarded the independence of his land. Some envoys hoped to bind him with treaties that would reduce him to a puppet, but he would not accept chains, whether of gold or of iron. His diplomacy was as sharp as his sword. He drew close when it served the interests of his people, and stepped back when it threatened their independence. The message was clear: Arabia would rise on its own terms. In 1932, after decades of struggle, Abdulaziz declared the unification of his territories into a single state, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. The announcement was more than a political decree. It was the culmination of 30 years of battles, alliances, sacrifices, and prayers. From Najd to Hijaz, from Al-Ahsa to Asir, the scattered tribes and regions were now united under one banner. For the first time in centuries, the Arabian Peninsula stood as one. The desert that had known division now echoed with unity. The dream of a young exile had become the reality of a king. Abdulaziz himself was a striking figure. Tall and broad-shouldered, his very presence commanded attention. His deep voice carried authority, but his manner carried fairness. He could be firm, even harsh when needed, but he could also show surprising gentleness. He often sat among his people without ceremony, hearing disputes and judging between them. To him, justice was the pillar of leadership. Whether the case involved a wealthy merchant or a poor herdsman, he weighed it with the same care. Such fairness earned him loyalty far stronger than fear ever could. People obeyed not because they were forced, but because they trusted his judgment. In the 1930s, a discovery beneath the sands would change the future of his kingdom. Oil. At first, its significance was uncertain. Some dismissed it as a curiosity, but Abdulaziz saw further. He realized that oil could transform the destiny of Arabia if handled wisely. Foreign companies came with offers, each eager to gain access. Abdulaziz negotiated with caution. He accepted expertise but refused surrender. Agreements were signed, but control remained firmly in his hands. He understood that oil was both a blessing and a test. In it lay the power to build roads, schools and cities, but also the danger of greed and foreign interference. It would be the responsibility of future generations to use it well. As years passed, Abdulaziz became more than a king. He became a symbol of resilience. He had endured exile, reclaimed Riyadh, fought countless battles, and united an entire peninsula. His story was told not only in Arabia, but across the Muslim world, as an example of determination and faith. In gatherings, elders would say, "He began with 40 men and a dream." And the young would listen, their eyes wide, inspired that one man's vision could reshape history. Yet Abdulaziz himself never claimed greatness for its own sake. He often reminded his people that what had been achieved was by the will of God, and that kingship was a trust, not a prize. In his later years, Abdulaziz often sat quietly, leaning on his staff, remembering the journey. He would recall the long nights in the desert, the taste of dust, the fear of betrayal, the roar of battle, the joy of victory. He knew better than anyone the cost of unity. Around him, his sons gathered, learning from his words and preparing to carry his legacy. He spoke to them of justice, of faith, of responsibility. "This land is not ours alone," he would say. "It is a trust for the people, for Islam, and for the generations to come." In November 1953, the long journey of Abdulaziz came to an end. In his palace in Taif, the founder of modern Arabia breathed his last. The news spread swiftly, and across the kingdom people wept as though they had lost a father. But even in mourning there was pride. Pride that they had lived to see unity, to see peace, to see a state that could stand with dignity among nations. Pride that one man's dream had become their shared reality. Abdulaziz was gone, but his legacy remained. Today, the name of Abdulaziz stands not only as the founder of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, but as a reminder of what vision, courage and faith can achieve. He began as an exile with nothing but determination. He returned with 40 men and reclaimed a city. He persevered through decades of hardship and in the end left behind a nation. His story is not just the story of one king, but the story of an entire people rising from division to unity. It is a reminder that history is shaped not only by armies and empires, but by the resolve of individuals who refuse to surrender to despair. As the desert winds whisper through the dunes of Arabia, they carry with them the echoes of Abdulaziz's journey. The clashing of swords in Riyadh, the prayers in Mecca, the treaties signed with care, the dreams of unity, all a part of the legacy he left behind. His life teaches us that greatness is not measured by wealth or comfort, but by resilience, vision and faith. Abdulaziz bin Abdul Rahman Al Saud was not merely a man of his time. He was a man who reshaped time itself, and his story, the story of the great, will continue to inspire for generations to come.